Epilogue. Scott spent a month in the hospital before being released. He was paralyzed from the waist down, thankful to be alive. He cut all ties with the clan after nearly dying from his wife's ranting. Helen sat by his side every day. Piper and Jabari visited every so often. But Scott didn't like how Helen would find excuses to leave him alone with Piper whenever Jabari was around. "I'm pregnant," Helen confronted Jabari as she wiped between her legs. Jabari washed his face and hands in the guest room's private bathroom. Helen was pregnant before Piper? He couldn't believe it. "I'm keeping it," Helen confirmed. "What will we tell Piper and your husband?" Jabari felt sick with himself, visiting a wounded man and sleeping with his wife. "Piper knows already. My husband thinks it's his, and we had sex around the same time. Doctors aren't sure if he'll make it. They found cancerous tumors while operating." Scott would have never guessed his wife began having sex with a landscaper who started all this in his home. Scott spent his time in the den alone, smoking and drinking while watching television. Piper and Helen took turns upstairs, finding it more manageable than their alternating weekends visiting Jabari in Buffalo for alone time rather than awkwardly watching one another. Whenever Jabari came to cut the lawn, he could find his ladies by the pool waiting for him. The yard looked incredible. Mother and daughter had never been happier or closer, and Scott found the peace he wanted in retirement. Scott made no complaints finally having the peace he wanted as he recovered. Scott no longer dealt with his wife's neuroticism of the outside world or his daughter's defiance, even less as Piper planned to return to California with Jabari. Helen couldn't ask for a better reason to visit her daughter for weeks at a time. I'm here for you every step of the way. Do I leave Piper now?" Barry wraps his arms around Helen's waist, rubbing her fupa as she blushed, shaking her head. "I expected you to run for the hills. After all I caused and did, I don't know if God's punishing me or rewarding you with a baby." Helen frowned, beginning to cry, turning into Jabari's chest. Jabari squeezed Helen tight, lifting up her chin and kissing her on the lips. Helen rubbed the young man's erection, wiping away her tears as she thought of what would make her feel better. Piper never let it go that Jabari got her mother pregnant and consistently used it to get whatever she wanted from him over their years of marriage. Piper and Jabari traveled the world together, starting up restaurants, hotels, and vineyards in their favorite countries to visit. Their children inherited their businesses, each taking them in their own creative directions in their lifetimes. Scott lived a happy man, spending his weaning years of life raising Jabari and Helen's son. Helen never told him anything. Scott used the strap-on to satisfy his wife, thrilled by her genuine joy and excitement, though he never caught on to how Helen behaved whenever Piper and Jabari came to visit. As Piper kept her father distracted, allowing her mother time alone to bond with her new son-in-law. After Scott's death, Helen moved in with Piper and Jabari. Jabari moved from being an uncle to a full-fledged father, raising his boy with the rest of his and Piper's kids. The mother and daughter had never been closer. Helen began learning from Jabari and following his leadership. Helen browsed his library, studying Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, John Henrik Clark, and Huey Newton, revolutionizing her perspective of reality through education. Helen began writing her own revolutionary writing under the name White Lioness, living well into her hundreds, traveling the world giving speeches. Sophia never returned to the Meyers residence and never told her husband about her brief affair with Jabari. They lived happily married well into their old age, never seeing or knowing of the horrors that occurred on the property. Sophia kept the videos of Helen into her death, laughing at them even harder when news hit about the White Lioness. Man went to heaven, being misled to join a gang of angry men at his most vulnerable, being forgiven for simply wanting a place to belong and feel understood. Douglas, however, went to hell, along with the rest of the neo-Nazi race soldiers who started a war with the police. Jabari and Helen's son, Roderick George Bennet, became a U.S. Senator, running in November as the first black Republican president against his father's better judgment, and to his mother's delight, hoping to unify those willing to look past the history of an evil. Hoping to unify those willing to look past the history of evil in America, to focus on overcoming through love, understanding, and joy, and to expose those who rather hate and help those suffering to lead the nation for 2 terms. Piper and Jabari's children went off into the arts, sciences, and touring with their grandmother to work on the family business of spreading awareness and educating people on race relations. Helen and Jabari's youngest son, Elias Scott Bennet, became a world-renowned rapper and singer, not associating much with his family while on tour, and living with his dad and grandmother Piper while home. And they lived happily ever after.